This isn't a ghost story, but a real-life experience involving the most frightening human I have ever had the misfortune to meet. This happened at the end of the year 8 years ago. A new guy joined my team at work. He was a young guy and he wore fashionable glasses. I had to train this guy up. I had been training people for about 3 years, so it wasn't that hard. I like to think I do a good job too. A week after the new guy joined the company, I was informed that he was going to miss training because he had called in sick with a cold. I just want to remind you again that this was before COVID. But that year there were a bunch of bugs going around, so I didn't really pay too much attention to his absence. The week after, he called in sick again, and the week after that. Seems like he was ill every Monday. It went on like this for 4 weeks. The excuses varied each week, from colds to stomach aches to headaches, you know. I heard that he was living alone, and I guessed that this guy liked to party a little too much on the weekends or something. He would always come into work and offer weak apologies on Tuesdays. Well, my boss was really pissed off at him. He told him that the next time he's sick, he better bring a doctor's note. The following week, I heard from a colleague that he had called in sick yet again. I was livid since I was supervising him. In Japan, Christmas Day isn't a national holiday, so we don't usually work. Christmas isn't even a family event over here either so much. It's usually for couples. So when this guy called in sick on the 25th, I instantly thought he skipped work to have a date or something like that. I managed to convince myself of that. I was really annoyed because I had always wanted Christmas off to spend time with my girlfriend. And this guy just joined the company, kept skipping my training sessions, and had a 3-day weekend each week. I flew into a bit of a jealous rage. It wasn't fair, and I hated it. So I grabbed his resume, and looked up his address and headed over to his apartment. I know I shouldn't have done that, but I think I was really stressed out at the time. It's no excuse though, really. I rang his doorbell and he didn't come to the door. I called his phone and he didn't answer. I guessed that he must be out somewhere enjoying another one of his sick days. I was thinking about what to do next, and I put my hand on his doorknob and opened it. I was too curious to pass up this opportunity. I put my face to the gap in the door. It was dark in there, and I couldn't see a thing. "Hey, you in there? Feeling sick, are we?" I said something like that, but I got no response. Then a thought came to me. What if he really was sick? What if he had some sort of undiagnosed sickness? I mean, I guess he could have been sick the whole time. I went into his apartment with the intention of checking on his well-being and thinking the worst, unsure of what I would find. What I found was something I could have never prepared for. It was dark in what I guessed was his living room, so I groped for the light switch. I managed to find it. When the light came on, I saw a woman sitting in a chair. I screamed. She was completely motionless. After a few seconds, I realized that she was a life-sized doll. It was super realistic. If you didn't look at it from the front, you'd never know that it wasn't a doll. It looked so lifelike. It was a pretty strange sight to turn on the light and to see a doll sat there in a chair in a once dark room. But what was on the table was just as strange to me. KFC. It's what we eat at Christmas in Japan. A Christmas cake and wine glasses. It was like he had set up a date with the doll. It also just dawned on me that I was now trespassing in this guy's house, since he clearly wasn't home. I didn't like what I was seeing here either, so that had me on edge. I began to sweat. I went to turn the light back off and slip out silently, when I heard, "Hey Kaidi, I'm back." There in the doorway stood the new guy from work. "Hey, boss. What are you doing here?" he said. I was sure I was trapped in the apartment of a madman. I didn't know what to do. I just wanted to go. I really shouldn't have come. I don't know if this guy had any other fetishes I should be worried about. He stared at me with a glare I had never seen from him at work. He looked like a completely different person. I thought we might get into an altercation, but that feeling slowly slipped away as I stood there dumbstruck. I had to say something before it turned into a felony. I'm really sorry. I thought you were sick when you didn't come to the door or answer my calls. I came to check on you, and the door was open, so I came in. I mean, you've been sick a few times this year. Oh well, Coyote has a cold, so I was about to return your calls, he said. Oh, that's Coyote. Well, she's very, very cute. I was babbling. There was no thought behind my words at all. I remember my back being wet with sweat. I didn't like how he was looking at me, and then he said, "Don't you think it's insane to walk into another person's apartment without permission? If I didn't return, right at this moment, I dread to think what kind of violent crime you would have committed against Coyote. She's home alone." Oh no, honestly, I would never do anything like that. I mean, I couldn't to a doll. I desperately swallowed the word doll. You're lying? I know you're lying. Because you were going to kidnap her, weren't you? And then you were going to do what to her? With that, he spun on his heels and stormed off to the kitchen. I needed to get out immediately. His apartment was on the second floor, but I did not let that stop me. I opened his window, stepped out onto his veranda, and then dropped down to the first floor. He must have heard me open the window because I could hear him scream with anger from behind me. "I'll kill you! You were gonna take her away!" His words became less and less coherent after that, but he kept screaming at me. I heard him throw open his door and run down the apartment stairs. I was screaming for someone to help me or call the cops. Unfortunately, this was the countryside and there weren't all that many houses around. I ran as fast as I could for about 20 minutes, certain that if I stopped, he would have taken my life. I got home and my cell phone was ringing. I felt for sure I dropped it when I climbed out of the window, but I guess that I didn't. I had an incoming call from my boss, so I decided to take it to explain what had happened. He cut me off and said, "The new guy's been arrested. What happened?" A police car had been on a routine patrol in his area, thankfully, and they had seen him walking the streets with a kitchen knife in his hand, looking menacingly. They asked him what he was doing, and he said that he was going to murder someone with my name. So they instantly arrested him. My boss picked me up and took me to work, where we waited for the police to come and interview us. The new guy was admitted to a psych ward, and naturally was fired. I still think about this each winter, and when I do, the same shivers race up my spine and my face goes red because I can still hear that knife slashing through the air as he chased after me. This happened when I was on a business trip with my boss. We had had a lot of meetings and business preparation that day. We didn't finish work until around 9 p.m. We had to meet our client in the most remote countryside location to conduct our business, which meant that getting back to our homes would be near impossible that night. I found a restaurant and we had dinner. After dinner, I searched on my phone for a hotel near the station. My boss told me to put away my phone and have a drink. He said that in remote locations such as these, there are always available hotels. I went with that. I needed a drink anyway. We finished our drinking at around 11:30 and headed back to what seemed to be the only hotel in a 5-mile radius. And we were in no mood to be traipsing around in the dark looking for other hotels. At least this one was right by the station. I approached the front desk and asked if they had 2 single rooms available for the night. I was surprised when the clerk told me that they only had 1 twin room left. At least it had separate beds. I asked the boss if he was alright sharing a room with me. He looked really annoyed and disappointed, but agreed. I didn't take it personally. I thought that he was just being this way because he was irritated and a bit drunk. I checked us in and we headed for the elevator. I was really tired, to be honest. As soon as I got in the room, I just wanted to go to sleep. I didn't turn on the TV or anything. After a while, I got into bed, and then my boss spoke to me. "Hey, have you heard of narcolepsy?" What's that, some kind of new car? I asked. Nah, it's one of the many sleep disorders. I'm a sufferer of sleep disorders myself. I have terrible bouts of sleep paralysis and I often have nightmares, he replied. Yeah, sometimes my breathing is erratic and I may even scream or shout. I'm just telling you now so you don't get freaked out. If it gets too much, just wake me up, okay? What the hell was this? I didn't want to be in the same room with my boss and his night terrors. I was tired and not really interested in this. I'm going to sleep now anyway, so if you have a bad dream, you probably won't wake me up because I'm really tired. Don't worry, I said. And as promised, I went to sleep almost instantly. I woke up abruptly, needing the bathroom, and I checked my phone, and it was around 2 a.m. I looked over to see if my boss was awake, and I saw that he was sleeping peacefully on his back. I didn't want to wake him up, so I used my phone's torch to make my way to the bathroom and back to my bed. Just before I hopped back into bed, I thought I'd take another glance at my boss to see if he was doing okay. I wish I hadn't, because he was now smiling. This was incredibly disturbing, especially in the dark. As my boss's mouth hung open in an insane grin, and now his eyes were wide open too. I thought that he was awake for a split second. He wasn't. I didn't want to move a muscle. He didn't blink once. His eyes were horrible. Like an old painting in a ghost movie, they followed me around the room. Then suddenly, his face reverted back to its normal state, and his eyes slowly shut. I didn't like this at all, but at least he wasn't grinning at me anymore. I watched him sleep for a few more minutes and thought that he was probably alright now. The only sound I could hear was the hum of the aircon unit. I was eager to get back to sleep. I didn't want to see him like that again. I couldn't sleep though. His creepy, inane grin just was burned into my mind. Let me try and describe it for you the way I see it in my head. It looked as if he had just died from laughing. I don't know how much time had passed, but I couldn't get back to sleep, and then I had the urge to use the bathroom again. I didn't want to pass by him again though. I couldn't even look at him. I turned and faced the opposite direction and tried to get some sleep. I was trying to sleep for a while, but I just couldn't. Then I heard the sound of walking, the undeniable sound of floorboards creaking. It sounded like someone was walking from one side of the room to the other, and there was only one person in the room with me. Strange. Really strange. It's not like anyone could have come in without me knowing. The hotel room was secure, and I'd have seen the light from the hallway as the door opens. How could it be my boss, though? I would have heard him get up. Thoughts had turned to the paranormal, which meant that sleep wouldn't arrive for a long time. I couldn't bring myself to look at him. I couldn't bring myself to open my eyes. I heard footsteps, almost running from one side of the room to the other. It felt like he was moving close to the bed, then far away, as if he was considering something, then backing out at the last second. I started to imagine what he was doing. It was seriously terrifying. What was on his mind? What was he thinking? Was he still asleep? It could only be him, right? There can't be anything else in the room with us. The footsteps slowly approached my bed and stopped. I was at the point where I was about to scream the hotel down. I braced myself and felt a cold hand land on my shoulder. Hey. At this point I did scream. It was all too much. Are you okay? The voice asked. It was my boss. After I calmed down, I explained everything, including the crazy footsteps running around the hotel room which I heard. What's the matter? Did you have a bad dream? Or did I do something? He asked. I just said that I couldn't sleep, and I asked him if it was okay to put the lights on for a while. He didn't mind. He wanted to smoke, and we were in a smoking room. I got out my computer and I just played solitaire for a while, since I was wide awake. I then searched the net to try and find out a bit of history about the hotel. I found a load of deleted posts on an old message board, but maybe something weird did happen here. I don't know. I went to ask my boss what he thought about the place and if it was giving off any vibes, but he was already asleep. One thing is for sure though. I don't ever want to share a room with that man again. That was too much. 3 years ago, I was admitted to hospital with kidney stones. It was horrible. On the first day, I was pretty much okay during the daytime, but at night I felt pain like you wouldn't believe. It really was the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. It got so bad that night, I was thinking of calling the nurse, but I thought I would try to endure it for as long as I possibly could. I thought that, if the stone passed, then the pain might go away. I had been there sweating, trying to endure this pain for about an hour when the door opened. I thought to myself, during this hour no patients came and went, so I guessed it might be a nurse doing the rounds. Oh great, maybe I'll get some painkillers, I thought. Not you, I heard a male voice softly mutter. It seemed like the owner of that voice was shuffling around in slippers. He was going around the beds. I was in a 6-bed room, and at night all the partition curtains were drawn. It sounded like this person was looking for something, as I heard him once again mutter, "Not you," as he passed around the room. I started to feel sick, and chills were shooting up my back. I was really suffering with this pain. I could see his silhouette through the partition curtains. I didn't want this guy to know that I was awake, because then I would have to speak to him, and because I was hurting, there was no way that I wanted to have a chit-chat. I laid my head on the pillow and closed my eyes. The next thing I knew, it was morning. Because I was new in the hospital, I felt like I didn't know the people in my room well enough to ask them about last night. Like I said, I was in a 6-bed room, and everyone in there seemed to be in for various minor issues. I read the room and understood that it wasn't a particularly talkative bunch. No one wants to chat much if they're in pain, I guess. After a day or two, there was a change in the room. The guy who was next to me left, and a new guy came in. New guy was a middle-aged man. He was more talkative than the others. We had a short conversation, and he told me he was in hospital with gastric pain, and he suspected that it was a stomach ulcer. I was still in pain with the descent of the stones into my bladder. It was getting really bad now. The pain was back with a vengeance. It was nighttime when the pain got worse again. It was similar to that night I heard the man walk around the ward. Then, just like clockwork, I heard the same low male voice mutter, "Not you." What the hell was this guy doing in here again, I wondered. Then, I heard him say something different for the first time. "You," he said. I heard his voice very close to my ear. I couldn't turn my body to face that direction due to the pain. I could only turn my head. Maybe it was more than pain, come to think of it. Maybe it was some unknown fear that prevented me from moving. There was a man stood beside the bed next to me. I thought about that voice, and I thought about the Grim Reaper. I managed to convince myself that the guy in the next bed would die soon. I don't know why these thoughts or premonitions entered my brain, but the next thing I did was even weirder. I tried to summon enough energy to throw open the partition curtains. I felt waves of panic wash over my mind. I didn't know what I was about to see. With the curtain now slightly pushed aside, I could see a man stood by the bed. He was wearing a white patient's gown. He was just a feeble and frail old man. I stared at him confused and dazed, and then he just shuffled his way out of the room. I thought that I was making a fuss out of nothing, and I was ashamed that I allowed my imagination to run away with me. The next morning I passed the stone, and then in the afternoon the doctor told me that I was going to be discharged that day. That was a relief. The guy in the bed next to me was gone, and I didn't know where he went. I was still kind of weirded out by the events of last night. Surely, if there was a guy walking around at night, the patients or staff members must have known about it, but no one seemed to know what I was talking about when I asked. Before I left, and now that I was able to move, I decided to take a little walk to see if I could find the guy who was in the bed next to me. Something about him just lingered on my mind, and I didn't like it. I wanted to settle my curiosity, and I hoped that he was okay. I went and I asked the doctor about him. I found out that the man was now in the intensive care ward. He looked almost unconscious. He looked very thin, and his face was almost expressionless. There was only a little pink left in his cheeks. I think that I escaped something unworldly in that hospital. This living nightmare began recently. It all happened when I took a late-night train home. There was a man standing in the same carriage as me, and he was almost at the opposite end. I noticed that he was staring at me. He wasn't being exactly subtle about it. He was about 5'9" and he was middle-aged and kind of chubby. He was tired looking, and he was wearing a grey suit. When I looked towards him, he didn't stop staring. I went back to my phone, but I hated his eyes on me. I'm a female in her 20s, by the way. This guy creeped me out, to be honest, and it's not a surprise to run into a perv on this line because it goes right through the red light district. I tried not to give it much thought, and I went home without incident that night. This happened one night, back in March. A few weeks later, I was riding the train. It was a weekend night, I think. I remember the train being pretty busy. I saw that creep again, and he was staring at me from a distance like before. I tried to ignore him and just focus on my phone, but from the corner of my eye, I could see him pushing through the crowd to get close to me. I was worried because this train line is also known for groping, especially during rush hour. He was trying to move through the crowd to stand behind me. I was getting scared now. Luckily, I could see my reflection in the carriage's window whenever we passed through somewhere dark. I thought about what I could do. I had my phone in hand ready to call the police if he did anything. I braced myself, but he didn't touch me. I kept watching him in the reflection of the windows, and I could see that he was smelling my hair. It grossed me out so much that I felt physically sick. I thought that even if I called the cops on him, they wouldn't be interested. I mean, I guess I had a weak case. I thought that he smelled my hair. So once again I went home, luckily, without any further incident. A month or two passed, and then I saw that creep for the first time outside of the train. It was night. I got off at my usual station and started walking home. After a while, I noticed that there was someone walking behind me. A few moments later, and he was right behind me. I turned my head to take a peek over my shoulder and realized that it was the train guy. Once again, he was staring right at me. I was really frightened, so I got to the end of the road, slowed down to allow him to pass me. He did pass, but he kept staring at me with every step he took. Then, as if he changed his mind, he stopped in his tracks and stared at me again. I felt so freaked out by this man I had to run to the nearest light source, which happened to be a convenience store. I hung out there for a while, and then I ran home. Hardly any time passed before the next time I had a run-in with that man. I was heading home late again due to working overtime. I was on the train at around midnight. As I was walking down this dark road, it was near pitch black, and a bicycle whizzed past me from behind. As it went by, the cyclist turned his neck to look at me, and I recognized him straight away. It was the weirdo from the train. This time, I was just wearing a t-shirt and shorts. He kept looking back at me as he was cycling away, and then he stopped, stared a while, and then slowly cycled back towards me down the narrow alley we were both in. I ran again. This time, on the phone to the police, I scrambled into a nearby business hotel, and the police sent a patrol car to the neighborhood to look for that guy. The next time I ran into that creep was just last month. I was walking home like normal, and someone grabbed me from behind. It was so horrible, it felt like he just came out of the shadows. I hated the idea of being touched by that man. I screamed and kicked out like an animal. I broke free and before I saw his face, I knew it was that man. He started walking at me, and I was saved by an employee of a local restaurant who had heard the commotion. I called the police again, but it felt like they were being kind of standoffish. I didn't really feel safe. The next incident occurred only a few days ago. Last Friday night, actually. I arrived at my station at around 11 p.m. I didn't want to be out late, but I had to go to a co-worker's birthday drinks. I was a little more confident that night and a little less scared. I guess that was because I had a couple of drinks on board. Then, all that confidence went out of the window when the train guy appeared. It was like the first time I saw him. He was wearing that grey coat and that grey suit. He was stood there doing his usual disturbing thing, staring at me. Before I knew it, I was running. I guess it's true what they say about fight or flight, right? I had never been so scared in my life. Why couldn't this guy just leave me alone? My heart started thundering in my chest when I heard his heavy footfall coming up behind me. He was chasing me. Thankfully, like I said before, the guy was pretty chubby, so I was easily able to pull away from him. I guess I'm fortunate that my parents made me join the track and field club back at school. I got home safely, and I was relieved, but concerned. I'm certain this man is stalking me. There's no real end to this story, as it is an ongoing part of my life at the moment. Note, this story was posted on August the 28th of 2020. There have been no more comments by the writer. The other night I was heading home, and I saw a woman who looked a little worse for wear. Like she had too many on board. She was getting harassed by some guy, so I went over to see if she was alright, and to help her out. To cut a long story short, she grabbed my shirt as she was falling, and I think she gripped the pocket of my shirt or something because it ripped and tore a seam in the shirt. I was really annoyed and upset, to be honest. It was my favourite shirt. It was the last birthday present I ever got from my wife before she passed away. It genuinely upset me. But I guess there are worse ways to ruin a shirt. At least I was trying to help someone, and I didn't spill something on it, or rip it through my own clumsiness. Still, it was a shame, but it couldn't be helped. I decided to hang on to the shirt. Or maybe I should say, I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I figured I could still use it as long as I didn't wear it outside of the house. I washed the shirt and I hung it up in the wardrobe. That night I had a dream. It was the first dream I had had in a very long time. I dreamt that I came home just as I did last night. But the only difference was I didn't come home to an empty home. I walked through the door and I saw my wife stood in the hallway. She was looking right at me. She looked at my shirt and tutted and said, "What's that?" She told me to give it to her. I took it off and she instantly went to work on it at the dining room table with a needle and a thread. I went upstairs to go change into another shirt and I came back down and sat on the sofa. I was looking over at her as she was working on sewing up my shirt, and that's all I remember. It was a nice dream. The next day I had plans with my daughter to go to the cinema and watch a movie and catch up. She's been living alone for a while. I was wondering what to wear. I opened my wardrobe as usual, and I noticed my favorite shirt. I took a look at it again, to see how bad the rip was, and to my surprise, I couldn't find it. I turned it over and over again in my hands, and I still couldn't find any tear in the fabric. I couldn't believe it. I looked at the back of the shirt and I noticed something. It was sewn up from the back so that the rip wasn't visible at the front. I wondered how the hell was this possible? And then I remembered my dream from last night, and I thought to myself, no way, she stitched it up for me. I didn't know how to comprehend the situation. It was so strange. I guess I knew what I was supposed to be wearing that day, so I took the shirt out of the wardrobe and threw it on. I told my daughter about my dream and the shirt. She looked up at me and said, "Oh, Dad, knowing you were probably drunk and imagined it. I bet there was no rip in the shirt." As she said this, I could see the tears welling in her eyes. I knew what she truly believed about my dream, even if she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud. I was amazed. That's really the only word for it. I mean, I got to see my wife again, and my shirt was fixed. I'm still kind of speechless. That's just like her, you know, always helping me out in situations like that. I'm hoping that this could be a regular thing, because I tell you what, I'd love to come home one day and have some of her cooking waiting for me again. Or I'd love to even see it in the fridge. It might not happen that way, I guess, but hey, here's to hoping. This happened a couple of years ago, when I went out with a bunch of friends for some drinks. I ended up staying later than I wanted, which resulted in me dashing for the last train home. Thankfully, I made it in time. The train started off being quite packed, but eventually it emptied out. It was great to get a seat, since I was pretty worse for wear. Before long, it was just me and some old salaryman. He was wearing a white shirt and tie, as well as business slacks. We were sitting at different ends of the train, but on the same side of the train. You know, not opposite one another. He was asleep when I glanced over. Since I was tipsy, I shut my eyes for a couple of seconds. Maybe 5 or 6 at a guess. Not a long amount of time. When I opened my eyes, I saw him. It seemed as if he had moved a few seats up towards me. At this point, I didn't know if it was because I was a little drunk, and forgot where he was sat, so against my better judgment, I kind of ignored it, and before I knew it, I'd closed my eyes again. Just like before, I only had my eyes shut for a couple of seconds before I opened them again. This time I opened them because I felt a bit uncomfortable. I realized the source of my unease. There was no mistaking it this time. He had moved up the rows of seats closer towards me. This was weird and creepy. I thought this guy might be looking to pickpocket me. I was drunk and full of confidence for some reason, so I thought that I would be the hero that this train needed. I decided to pretend to be asleep. I decided to pretend to be asleep, and when I caught him in the act of attempting to rob me, I would turn him over to the station staff. Just as I suspected, as soon as I closed my eyes, he got up and stood in the center of the train. He didn't approach me like I thought he would, though. Something weirder happened. Something that I will never forget. The man just stood there, in the middle of the carriage, and spun around and around. I watched this through half-open eyes, wondering what the hell was going on, and questioning myself if I was imagining it or not, or even dreaming it. Then he started to speak. Well, chant, I suppose, is more accurate. It went something like this. "You can't trick me, you can't trick me. Pretend to be asleep, but you can't trick me." Horrible seconds crawled by as I listened to him shuffling around and murmuring his weird chant. I was still pretending to be asleep. I mean, I didn't have much other choice. His chant grew louder and angrier. His footsteps turned to stomps, and then the train pulled into a station. I saw my chance, and I bolted out of the train. It was too much for me. I waited until the last seconds before the train's doors closed to make a break for it, so he wouldn't have a chance to follow me. This resulted in me walking over 2 hours home in the dark. But anything was better than being on that train with him. This happened a little while ago. I live with my boyfriend, and the other night he went out to drink with his friends. He said that he was probably going to be out late. I stayed up as late as I could, but when he wasn't back by 2 a.m., I got a bit worried. I tried calling him, but his phone was off. I guessed that it must have run out of battery. Even if that was the case, he said he'd get the last train home, and it was too late now. I was annoyed and tired of waiting for him, so I just went to bed. I got under the blanket and shut my eyes. Then I heard the sound of keys at the door, and then the sound of the door opening. I pretended to be asleep. I didn't feel like dealing with him, and I was still mad. I heard him rummaging and rustling around, bumping into things, because he didn't turn the light on. As he approached, I could smell alcohol and cigarette smoke. He was breathing like an idiot too. It was really annoying. I was so mad at him. Usually when he comes back drunk like this, he's usually in the mood for you-know-what. Well, he had no chance of that tonight. I heard his footsteps nearing the end of the bed, and then the bed creaked as he climbed in. When he got closer to me, I realized that something was wrong. My boyfriend had a lean and fit body. The body next to me at that time was flabby, and the skin was cold. I was petrified. I slowly opened my eyes to see a fat man of about 40 years old lying next to me. He was holding a pair of scissors between his lips. They were my scissors. I had left them on the coffee table. My eyes met his. He was glaring at me. Then I realized that this complete stranger was completely naked. I tried to scream, but nothing came out besides a gasping noise. I struggled against him and managed to roll out of bed. I ran out of the apartment, completely barefoot. I ran into my boyfriend, the real one this time. He was coming in the apartment's entrance doors, just as I was running out of them into the cold December night. I tried to explain what had happened, but I couldn't stop shaking and panicking. After about 10 minutes or so, I managed to stop hyperventilating, and I got myself together. I explained to my boyfriend what had happened, and we went back to the apartment together to check it over. I wasn't afraid to go back there. I wanted this guy caught. When we got back to the apartment, we found no one there. Our laminate floor was covered in some liquid. Water, maybe. There was some weird gloopy red stuff as well. I didn't know what the hell that was. I also have no clue to this day how this guy had a copy of our key. I know he must have had a key because I heard the door open with a key. It definitely wasn't a lockpick or anything like that. My boyfriend and I were the only ones with a set of keys. We had no duplicates. It was a new building, so there was no chance of a former resident turning up. We made an arrangement with the landlord that the locks would be changed immediately, and then changed every 4 months. I'm glad my boyfriend came back when he did. It was not a dream. This happened when I was in high school. I was part of the sailing club, and we were at sea. We often went out to do training and things like that. This story takes place close to Guam and Hawaii. Kind of in the middle, I guess. After a few days into the voyage, the ship stopped moving. Our captain investigated and tried to find the cause of the trouble. He found nothing wrong with the engine. He then went to the stern and found something entangled around the screw propeller. We all took a look from the stern and we were all surprised what we saw. A huge squid's tentacles were tangled around the propeller. One of the tentacles was loose and we could see the length of it as it bobbed in the sea. Our captain said that it could be a 15-foot squid. We couldn't see the body of the squid, just the tentacles. The body was likely under the hull, and the squid was almost certainly dead. Even if we tried to reverse the propeller, we wouldn't be able to break away from the tentacles. There was no other option but to remove them manually. So with ropes, carabiners, knives, and a saw, 2 divers slipped beneath the surface to free our ship from the grip of the squid. After about 2 to 3 minutes, one of the divers emerged and said it would take them about an hour to get the propeller free. He said that the squid was so big they couldn't even get anywhere near the propeller. The diver went back under to get to work. About 30 minutes or so passed, and the divers were back at the surface. This time, they were shouting for someone to help them up as soon as possible. We all grabbed for the ropes and started pulling them. We didn't know what was going on. While we were hoisting them up, something smashed against the hull of our ship, causing it to shake and lilt. It felt like an earthquake. The divers were finally back on deck and everyone was panicking. Then a second crash came to the hull. It really made the ship rock. We were all silent, scared silent. We couldn't do anything but look out across the deep, dark ocean. The body of the squid was now at surface level, and then we saw it. A huge shadow approaching it. The biggest shark I've seen in my life was only meters away from me. It was about 10 foot below the surface, and it dwarfed that 15-foot squid, despite not being directly next to it. It looked to be over 65 foot, and if you consider that it was 10 foot below the surface, it would make it larger than that. Seriously, this thing was the length of a bowling alley, and then some. I could only see its silhouette, but to me it looked like a great white. It didn't stick around long. It shot down to deeper waters and out of our field of vision. I would have thought that it might have been a sperm whale or a whale shark if everyone on the ship wasn't so adamant that it was a great white. Plus, I don't think a whale shark would go for a squid, which is what I presumed the great white was after. Eventually, we discovered that the propeller was bent, and we couldn't get it to work. I think when we heard those crashes against the hull, the shark was tearing away the squid. With the sheer power of that thing, it bent the propeller while it was tearing the squid apart. We had no choice but to send out a rescue signal, and thankfully, an Australian merchant ship bound for Japan picked up our signal and towed us. We were home in a few days. It was scary out there in the open ocean with the thought of that huge shark thing down there. When we finally checked out the damage to our ship, we found that the propeller was hanging on by a thread, and there was no sign of the tentacles that were once so tightly wrapped around it. I wanted to get a copy of the captain's log to share, but I haven't been able to. I'm curious to see how it was formally reported, but I don't think I'll get the chance to read it. Thanks for listening, and I'd love to hear what people think that was. In Japan, we have a kind of understanding between mountain climbers. When mountain climbing, if you happen to meet another party of mountain climbers, you should greet each other. However, in a blizzard or a snowstorm, it's very rare that you would come across another party of climbers. But if you do, don't stop and chat. Just keep on moving and never look back. If you do stop, they'll think you need rescue and turn around. There's also another theory that you may encounter spirits in a snowstorm. Spirits of lost mountain climbers, and you wouldn't want them to follow you. I broke this golden rule, and my party were stuck in a life-threatening situation, high in the freezing cold mountains. On that day, we were going up the mountain in a line, and the snowstorm hit. We were relatively close to the summit, and thankfully, we managed to take refuge in a small cabin. On the way up, we saw another party heading down the mountain. When we passed one another, I called out to the other group. No one from the other group responded, possibly to show that they did not need any help. I looked at the other members of my group, shocked, and continued to head to the mountain lodge. I was an inexperienced mountain climber at the time, and I didn't know about this unspoken rule, so I called out, "Where are you going? The cabin's this way." The other party just continued down the mountain until they were out of sight. But I heard one voice call back, "We'll come back later." In this blizzard, there is no later, so I stood there surprised by the other party's response until I was urged to hurry up and get to the lodge. When we entered the lodge, there were sleeping bags. It was freezing. Everyone huddled side by side to wait out the snowstorm. We were pretty miserable and shivering when we heard the knocking on the door. The leader of my party stood by the door and shouted, "Come in!" Baffled why anyone would choose to wait outside in the blizzard. No one came in. The door wasn't locked or anything. Someone called out, "Maybe they're hurt and they can't open the door," as they approached the door to open it. He opened the door and there was no one out there. Just the blizzard blew in. "Well, maybe that was the sound of snow hitting the door and it just sounded like knocking," someone said as the door was shut. I didn't really buy that. About 20 minutes went by. We all heard the sound of knocking on the door again. I opened the door to see if anyone was out there, but again, there was no one there. Bear in mind that every time the door is open, the temperature in the cabin drastically drops. We knew we couldn't keep doing this all night, so we were left with a horrible moral dilemma. Leave someone out there to freeze, if they are indeed out there, or just ignore the knocking. The knocking continued. People were arguing whether to open the door or not. The interval between each knock shortened. 20 minutes, 10, 5. With some of the group up in arms and demanding that the door be opened, and others in the group demanding the door remain shut. Each group winning occasionally. The group reached crisis point, and our leader ordered that the door of the cabin was to remain shut. Still, the knocking persisted. We all remained silent and tried our best to ignore it. The knocking finally ceased. There were some murmurs of relief. While members of the group were considering if they had done the right thing or not, a banging sound began on one of the cabin walls. We shot each other nervous glances. Then, we all heard a voice. It was spine-chilling. It sounded like a human voice. "Hey, hey." It really sounded like someone was out there. Not only were the walls being banged on, but the ceiling and the floor was shaking with the impact. It continued. That eerie voice just kept calling, "Hey, hey." It went on all night. We hunkered down in the middle of the room and took turns taking guard. The snowstorm subsided in the morning. We were supposed to climb to the summit, but no one wanted to go anymore. Could it have been the voice of a lost spirit in the snow? Or some kind of cryptid? Does anyone know what that was? I often think about it. This happened more than 10 years ago. Back then I was living with my parents in our family home. It was just your run-of-the-mill family home, one I lived in since elementary school. I was out sick from high school. I was spending most of the day upstairs in my bedroom. I was up there, and I heard the front door open downstairs. That day I knew that my parents were out at work. I wasn't expecting anyone to walk right in. I thought for a second that I could have imagined the sound of the door opening, but about 2 minutes after I heard the door open, I heard footsteps coming from downstairs. I was scared that someone might have broken into our family home and was wandering around down there. All of my senses were alert. I strained my ears in the direction of the ground floor. I could definitely hear footsteps, and my heart sank when I heard those footsteps rising up the stairs. I suddenly felt unsafe in my own home. No, more than that, like there was a change in the atmosphere. The footsteps slowly approached. I was so scared I began to sweat. My breaths grew deeper and raspier, and I felt the beginnings of a panic attack blooming deep in my lungs. The footsteps had ascended the staircase and had finally stopped in front of my bedroom door. It wasn't my imagination, it couldn't be, and I felt for sure that there was someone just beyond my bedroom door. My worst fears were confirmed when I heard the doorknob move, as if a hand had grasped it. At this point I was so scared I couldn't even move. It was as if I was struck with sleep paralysis. I was stuck like this for some time, until I heard the footsteps disappear down the hall and back down the stairs. I was so petrified by the whole event, I couldn't move in my bed for at least an hour. I finally psyched myself up enough to leave my room. When I opened the door, I found that there was no one there. It was as if no one had been in the house at all. As I was looking over the house, my dad walked in. I told my dad what had happened, and he just scoffed and laughed. He said that he had unlocked the door to get in, so if someone was in here, they must have had a set of keys. This was the first in a line of strange and mysterious incidents which happened at my family home. Before, I had lived there for about 10 years and hadn't experienced nothing of the sort. My older sister had already moved out by the time this happened, but when she came to visit, I told her what happened. I expected her to laugh at me, but she just said, "Oh, it happened to you too, huh?" She went on to explain to me that she had experienced her own fair share of frightening incidents in our family home. She said that she didn't want to tell me because I was young when it happened. She said that once she was running upstairs and she heard footsteps running behind her as if they were chasing her. Another time she was lying in bed and she was pulled nearly clean off the bed by her ankle. She said that many strange things had happened when we were young, but she just didn't want to tell me. She didn't want to scare me. She said that she even tried to purify our house, but that didn't stop the strange goings-on. From the day I heard those footsteps, I was scared in my own home. I heard the footsteps frequently and occasionally suffered with sleep paralysis. I never experienced anything creepy anywhere else, so I just believed that my house was haunted. For some reason, I spoke about my house to a senior at work a few years later. And after I told him what had happened, he replied, "It's not a bad thing, you know." He said that he had had a similar experience, and according to him, footsteps can be a sign that family members who have passed are still present, as if they are watching over us. So if you hear footsteps, perhaps they don't mean you any harm, they're just here to visit. When he told me this, I felt such a rush of emotion. I felt sorry for being so frightened. I felt so appreciative, and for some reason, I just burst out in tears. From then on, when I heard something like footsteps at my parents' home, I kept my senior's words in mind and lived with gratitude. Eventually I got married and moved away. My father passed away too, so my mother just lives alone there. Sometimes I wonder if she's okay, living alone there, but then I remind myself that my family, who are no longer here, watch over her. My parents are in a cult. I grew up in it. It was all I knew for the longest time. As far as I can remember, there were 10 executives, which basically meant leaders, and the cult had approximately 200 followers. I remember vaguely before the cult, my father, he worked for a trading company somewhere. Unfortunately, before long, he became an executive, and we all left our family home and moved into the cult's dormitory-style housing. I was in the first year of elementary. My brother was also at the same school, but he was a couple of years older than me. Everything changed for my family that autumn. We were the only kids at school who were attending classes 3 days a week. It made us kind of outcasts with our classmates. I remember that teachers were annoyed at this arrangement and wanted us to go to school more. Our parents were called in to speak to the teachers at one point, and that really sticks out in my mind because, after that, there was no more school. From that day forward, after breakfast, we would have religious studies, which basically meant reciting cult doctrine or participating in ritualistic ceremonies. Then after, we had the luxury of working in the compound. This meant that we would either work indoors or in the many acres behind the compound, which they owned. Outdoor work was field work, planting seeds, maintaining crops, feeding animals, that kind of thing. I don't like to cast my mind back to those days so often, but I remember that the chickens were scary and the goats were cute. Mum and Dad lived in this sort of rhythmic happiness together. They barely noticed or cared about my brother and I, or what we got up to. He was a kind brother. He taught me maths and how to read, all in secret in bed at night time by torchlight. I remember one night, about roughly a year into our life in the compound, my brother was teaching me as usual, in the silence of the night. He turned to me and whispered, "This place is no good. Mum and Dad aren't Mum and Dad anymore. We shouldn't be here. I want you to come with me." I understood that at the time to mean, Mum and Dad have gone to the other side. Like a game or a film, they joined the wrong team. A bad team. There was no turning back. There was to be no more childhood if I stayed in the compound. Just work and religious studies. I knew, even at that age, that there would be no more school, and my whole life would be in that compound, in the cult. I would love to tell you that this was a heart-aching decision, but the sad reality was, I wanted to go. My brother wasn't lying. They weren't my parents anymore. They weren't themselves anymore. They were without personality, like the others, just empty shells, and we had to go. The next night my brother told me to sleep wearing some thick clothes. He woke me up in the dead of night, and we exacted our plan to escape the compound. He had intentionally left the door to one of the fields unlocked for the past few nights, and because it had gone unnoticed, he thought it would be the best way to make a break for it. In the cold hours before daybreak, we crossed the fields, and then slipped through a weak point in the barbed wire into the forest behind the compound. After a while, we saw the lights of a city up ahead in the distance. My brother was carrying me on his back. He was panting heavily. When he couldn't carry me any further, he grabbed me by the wrist and pulled me along. Slowing down wasn't an option. We found a bus stop, and we waited there for the longest time, in the cold, until a bus came along. We got on and got off at a train station I hadn't heard of. All the while, I kept looking over my shoulder, and I was feeling incredibly guilty. I remember that my brother asked the staff at the station something. We changed trains more times than I can remember. Each time my brother would use a payphone at the station, and then somehow we ended up somewhere familiar. I felt like I had been to this station. When we exited the station, there were some adults, and they approached us. "You're a and right?" I hid behind my brother, and he turned to me and whispered, "It's okay." He smiled. I forgot what his smile looked like. It turns out the people who greeted us at the station were there to help. My brother's former teacher from school, his lawyer friend, and a policeman. My brother seemed to know, or was told, that even though we would escape our parents and the cult, they would be able to get us back to the cult, because they had custody over us. Eventually, we were moved into a facility for children. And we grew up, living life completely devoid of our parents. We went back to school, graduated, we got scholarships. We got to go to college. My brother helped me the whole way. We studied at night, just like we did in the compound. It felt great to get good grades at school, after feeling as if we missed out on so much. I can tell you that the most terrifying thing about those days in the cult was the feeling of being trapped in a spider's web. Like the more we struggled, the more futile it felt. But that's all in the past now. There's nothing but the horizon ahead of me. I don't have any time to waste on fear anymore. Thanks for listening to my story. Oh, and by the way, the name of the cult was... Something really weird happened about 2 weeks ago, while I was taking my dog for a walk. I have a mixed breed dog called Kuro, and my son, who's in high school, used to always walk the dog in the evenings, but since he started at high school, he's been coming home later and later. He is part of a lot of club activities, so I decided to take Kuro on his evening walks. I didn't mind, walking the dog isn't much trouble. I work and go home pretty much the same time every shift, so I have time to vary the course for the dog now and then. I take the dog on one of 4 routes, so the dog doesn't get bored, or maybe that's so I don't get bored. Either way, that's what we do. I think it's good exercise for me too, as I sit at a desk all day long. The night this experience took place on, I took the dog on what I like to call the shrine route. From my home to the shrine, it's about a 15-minute walk. There's a baseball field nearby, and at night it's a pretty good place to let the dog stretch his legs. Now, as for the shrine, there used to be a big beautiful Shinto shrine there, but it was destroyed in a suspicious fire. Rumor has it, it was arson. A smaller shrine was constructed by local volunteers in its place. I was walking along the outskirts of the baseball field when suddenly a car came speeding out of an alley. Its headlights were on. It wasn't dangerous, it was nowhere near me, but it made me notice something, because its headlights shone on an object up ahead. It was inside the baseball field. The object was a 1-liter plastic bottle. I know it's not that strange to see a plastic bottle in a baseball field, but this one was full of liquid, and it had some paper sticking out the top. The liquid was greyish, maybe black, and it seemed to be swirling. Now, I'm not sure if that was because of the street light or the dark of the night obscuring my view. Either way, I thought it was a little weird. I guessed that it could be some sort of cat repellent or something. I held Kuro's lead tightly. He started growling and trying to pull away. I decided to get out of there. It was weird. After that, Kuro's behavior seemed to change. Usually he's an even-tempered dog, but that night he seemed wary, and he was constantly sniffing for something. We kept going and we came to another corner about 50 meters up ahead. Kuro emitted a sharp yelp. It was almost like he swallowed the sound. Kuro seemed to point to something with his body. I looked ahead and I saw another one of those weird bottles with the paper in its mouth. This time, it was hanging from a hedge, outside of someone's home. I wanted to get a closer look, but Kuro kept pulling me away. I tied Kuro to a nearby electrical pole, and I approached the bottle. The liquid in this bottle was clearer. The paper had been folded many times, and it was almost as long as the bottle. This is the part that really creeped me out. There was some sort of organic matter in there, like some kind of internal organ or something. It wasn't that big, but it was in there. It was slowly rotating, like the other I had seen. I really wished that I hadn't seen that. It was disturbing. I wondered if it was some sort of prank made by some kids. Some twisted kids who had taken the organs of a fish or a frog and displayed them in this strange, semi-ritualistic manner. No, the more I thought of it, I couldn't convince myself that this was the work of kids. It was time to leave the area. I wanted to get to the shrine to finish my walk. I walked quickly, and Kuro didn't seem to mind. I usually turn back when I get to the main gate of the shrine. I don't think it's a nice place to bring the dog into. I felt the presence of someone behind the rows and rows of torii. You know those red gates that you see at shrines? I saw a shadow moving. I heard the rustling of footsteps of someone unseen, and I couldn't take my eyes off of the direction I perceived them to be coming from. Amidst the red of the torii gates, I finally could faintly see someone as they drew closer to me. It was a middle-aged woman wearing Japanese-style clothes. She was carrying a heavy cloth bag ahead of her. She was holding it with both hands. I could see the spouts of 7 or 8 of those plastic bottles that I had seen in the baseball field. She got closer. She terrified me. Her face was bright white, with layers of thick makeup. She passed me by as if I wasn't even there. She was solely focused on whatever she was doing. She glared at Kudo, and my dog whimpered. She left us stunned and frightened. Kudo vomited on the walk home. I'm not sure if it's related. He didn't eat that night either. I thought about taking him to the vets, but he seemed to get better in the morning. Naturally, I stopped walking that route after I reported what I saw. I don't think the police were that interested in my story. Perhaps they thought I was just a bored housewife with an overactive imagination. Well, that's the way they made me feel. I don't know what happened with those bottles, and if there are more of them, or if they are still there. I asked about the shrine with colleagues and friends, and I heard a couple of rumors. There were a further 2 reported outbreaks of fire. These reports were called in, and when the fire brigade arrived, nothing was reportedly burning. It's very weird. I feel like something's going to happen around here. I constantly feel on the edge. I don't know what's going on. Something strange though. This happened when I was in my first year of university. My university was in the countryside, and there really wasn't that much to do in the evenings. A friend and I developed an interest in night fishing, and that became our nightly entertainment. We'll call my friend Kay. My university was on the coast, near a big shipping port. We had no shortage of places to fish. I remember I was fishing for rockfish that night. We cast off, just a little off to the edge of the harbour, about 5 to 6 foot above the water. Waves lashed against the tetrapods on the other side of the harbour. Tetrapods are those giant stone shapes which prevent waves eroding the coast. Other than the waves, it was a pretty quiet night. My friend wanted to fish for some sea bass, so we split up. Nobody seemed to fish in this area at night. All the old men who fished here during the day were long gone before the sunset. I was concentrating on my fishing, watching my lure bob on the waves, and then I sensed a presence of someone over my right shoulder. There was a thin, old man stood right next to me. How long had this guy been there? I wondered. This is a little rude, I thought. I looked at him, and he just stood there with a dumb grin on his face. It really spooked me because the streetlight seemed to illuminate his face in the dark. It was as if he had crept right out of the shadows. It was so awkward. I couldn't stand the silence any longer, so I broke it, and I asked him a question. "Are you out on a walk tonight?" He didn't say a word. He just kept standing there, smiling his odd smile. I thought that this guy was weird, but I didn't act rude to him because I didn't know if he was, okay, mentally. I thought that if he just wants to watch some fishing, he can go right on ahead because he wasn't bothering me. I went back to focusing on my lure bobbing in the sea below, waiting for a bite. After a while, I realized he'd gone somewhere. Good, I thought. Then after about an hour, I went to join my friend, and I told Kay about the strange old dude. He laughed and said, "Have you ever heard of Umijiji? It's a yokai. There's a story about it. Apparently, if you see this strange old man and speak to him at night, and he doesn't respond, he will steal your soul and drag you to the bottom of the ocean." I was a little freaked out by this myth, but I knew there was no such thing. So I just laughed it off and continued fishing, but I sat with Kay this time. After a little while, a black car pulled up. What now? I thought. Can't people just leave us in peace? The black car seemed to be pretty shady. It just idled its engine there for about 30 minutes, behind us. It was creepier than that old geezer. Why would someone drive out to the harbor this time at night, and then just stay behind us? We thought that it could be a Yakuza or something. We didn't like it because the car seemed to be pointed at us. Whoever the driver was clearly watching us. It started pulling towards us now. "Hey, it's not gonna stop, what the hell?" my friend shouted. Anxiety raced through my heart. I tried to collect all our fishing gear to move out of its path. The car's speed increased, as if to aim at me whilst I was vulnerable. The distance of about 15 meters disappeared almost instantly. Kay managed to jump out of the way, but I didn't. The car hit me, and I clattered into some boat rope, mooring rope, and it got caught around my legs. Before I knew it, I was falling headfirst into the sea. I didn't even notice that the car was falling with me. The last thing that I heard was Kay shouting something as I entered the water. When I surfaced, I saw the rear of the car pointing downwards into the sea, sinking down into the deep. After that, I was hoisted out of the water by the very rope which had tripped me. Kay pulled me out, and we got the hell out of there. I called the police, and I heard the next day 2 bodies were found in the car. I remember seeing their photos on the news. One face belonged to that creepy old man who watched me fish. The other belonged to his wife. However, her cause of death was not drowning. She was already dead before the car hit the water. Apparently, she had been dead for over 2 months. The creepy old man had propped up his decaying wife in the passenger seat and then drove it into the sea. Not only that, but he had intentions of taking me and Kay with him. Did he come here with that intention, to take someone with him? Or were we just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Above all, why was he smiling so much? That's the thing I can't get my head around. When I lie in bed and it's dark, sometimes my mind torments me with his face emerging from the shadows like it did on the harbor. I'm still scared of it. I'm still scared of him. My family used to live in the countryside. When I was at school, and school would be out for the summer, I would often be in the house alone during the daytime. Usually I would sit up in my room reading books, waiting for my mum to come home from her part-time job. She would usually be back around evening time. One day I was doing my usual routine of reading upstairs, when I heard a noise coming from downstairs. It sounded like it came from the front door. I have always had a really good sense of hearing, so I was able to hear someone quietly open and close the front door. Now I wasn't worried at this point because I thought that it was just my mum coming home early. The house was silent. My mum always used to call upstairs when she got home. I started to think that it wasn't my mum down there, and I began to worry. My whole body went stiff. I couldn't move a muscle. I just kept thinking, what if it wasn't Mum down there? There wasn't time to panic though. I forced myself to my feet. I opened my bedroom window quietly, so if something was about to happen, then at least I would have an escape route. Then I crept over to the bedroom door, which was already open, and I looked out of it towards the top of the stairs. I heard some shuffling kind of sounds. I remember thinking that it could have been a big cockroach flying around down there. In my young age, I couldn't fathom the idea that anyone besides the people who lived in this house would have the gall just to walk in. I had no concept of home invasions or burglars at that age. I decided to go downstairs to try and find the source of the noise. I thought that the sounds were coming from the kitchen, but there was no one there. I thought that it must have been just my imagination, so I turned to go back upstairs. And that's when I heard a creak. The door beneath the kitchen sink slowly swung open. I was sweating, but I wasn't sure if it was through fear or because this happened in the height of summer. I stooped to look inside the cupboard. I saw a pair of legs in there and a hand gripping the sewage pipe. I didn't know what to do. I nearly collapsed. I uttered a small whimpering sound, then quickly walked away. I was so panicked, I couldn't understand what I'd just seen. I got into a sliding wardrobe. I guess that's what you do when you're a child. When there's trouble, or you're scared, you hide, right? I just sat in the wardrobe, with my knees pulled up to my chest, shivering. I guess I stayed like that for about an hour. During that time I heard no other sounds. The house was silent, but I stayed in the wardrobe. It was so hot. I was worried that there was a ghost in our house. I couldn't even open my eyes. I couldn't really process what I had seen in the kitchen. I just waited for Mum to come home. I managed to convince myself that there was something on the other side of the wardrobe I was hiding in. I then realized whatever was out there could get my mum when she walked through the door. I couldn't have that. I couldn't let my mum be in danger. I don't know why I suddenly felt so courageous, but I did. I left the safety of the wardrobe. Thinking back on it, it was mad that I did that. Absolutely mad. I didn't see anyone in the house though. Some drawers and cupboards were open, but other than that there was nothing else out of place. I even checked under the sink, and the owner of those legs and that hand that I had seen earlier had seemingly disappeared. Satisfied that the house was now empty, I headed back upstairs to continue reading. I pushed my door open and then stopped dead in my tracks. My bed looked different. It looked as if there was something in the bed, beneath the covers. I then saw a foot slide slowly out from the covers. It was real now. There was someone here with me. Through teary eyes, I tried my best to step backwards and out of the room without making a sound. But I had been spotted. I saw an eye staring at me from the gap in the covers. The covers then slid down to reveal a man's face. There was an adult man in my bed, in my room. A man I hadn't ever seen before. I screamed and I just ran for the stairs. I heard the covers being thrown to the floor, and the sounds of thunderous adult footsteps giving chase. I ran outside and shut the door. I ran into a bald guy passing by on the street and he helped me. He called the police for me. I was just an 8-year-old girl, and it was all too much. The bald man restrained the intruder, and he didn't let him get away. The police came very quickly and arrested him. It turns out that the intruder was a delivery person. I had accepted a parcel from him once. He must have known that I would be home alone, or he must have thought that no one was home. He might even have asked me if anyone was home, and I might have told him that I was always alone in the daytime. I can't remember. I just hope I wasn't that dumb though. I asked my mum about this event again recently, and she said that all we got was a call from the delivery company's head office, issuing an apology. They then considered the matter closed. It was incredibly traumatizing for me. The neighbors said that they had seen him eyeing up our house. Even though I have no idea what he was planning to do, I think myself very lucky to still be around. If you consider the possibilities in your own head now, you might think me lucky too. My mum quit her job soon after this, and I wasn't left alone until I was older. We ended up moving houses too. When I was younger, there was a small shrine close to my elementary school, and I remember that I played there often. Although small, it had a main building and a little garden-like area. Beyond the garden was a forest that always seemed to me like it endlessly stretched onwards. The forest seemed massive, but that might have been down to the fact that I was a little kid, and everything seems bigger when you're a child. In front of the shrine's main hall was where we played. There was this big open space, and it felt like it was ours. There was a small candy shop near the shrine too, so all us neighborhood kids would hang out at the shrine with our sweets. There were about 6 or 7 of us in our group. I remember going there to play hide and seek often. It was great. When I got into junior high school, I stopped playing there so much. I got busy with all my club activities. I didn't have the time to hang out with that friend group much. One day after school, I ran into one of my close friends from those days, and I walked home with him. He agreed that life had got a lot busier since we were growing up, and we reminisced on the good old days. We were talking about the time we played a game of TIG or tag, depending where you're from. While we were on this subject, I discovered that our memories of those days differed. We seemed to disagree on the number of friends in our group. I seemed to remember a boy, but my friend didn't. We chatted about it, and it went something like this. Hey, aren't you forgetting someone? There were more than 6 in our group. What about the boy with the very fair skin and those big eyes? To this, my friend would adamantly reply, What do you want about? There was only 6 of us. I don't remember this kid. So that was strange because I remembered the kid clearly. I decided to check in with some of my friends the next day at school because I wanted to get this discrepancy sorted out. I asked 2 other friends and they could remember playing together at the shrine, but once again, they had no recollection of the kid with the fair skin that I remembered. It was starting to get a little creepy at this point. I remember that kid so clearly, so how is it possible that none of my friends do? Are they all trying to trick me for some reason? Or is there something at work there at the shrine? When I was in my second year of high school, I used to go down to the park with my friends together and we would mess around. We used to play football for hours down in the park, with only the street light to see our way. It was fun. But my favorite thing we used to do down the park was prank calling random numbers. This happened a while ago when mobile phones weren't that common. I was the only one of my friends who owned one. So when we were done playing football, we would all gather around my phone and dial random numbers. It's really dumb, but we would always wait and hope for a girl to answer the phone. Anytime we spoke to a guy, we just hung up or tried to annoy them. Once we were speaking to a girl, I would do the talking and my friends would listen, trying to stifle their laughter. Sometimes they would leave the call too. But it was usually me since it was my phone. Thinking back on it now, it was really an annoying, immature thing to do. I mean, we must have irritated a bunch of people. But hey, you can't change the past. Okay, here's the cringy part. I always thought that I would call up a girl and we would fall in love, and that was really appealing to me since I wouldn't know what she looked like. I would just go on the sound of her voice and her personality. So making those calls in the park turned out to be quite the thrill for me and my friends, because we never knew what kind of person we would be speaking to. Sometimes it could be an argument with an old man, and other times it could be something entirely different. There was one call I'll always remember. Some girl said, "Is that you, Kai?" And I replied, "Yeah, it's me." Then she just burst out crying and wouldn't stop for like 3 minutes straight. Turns out that Kai was her late boyfriend. He had only just recently passed away. I felt really bad about that. One night I typed in a phone number which wasn't that different to my own. I just took out a few of my numbers for some random ones. I managed to get a girl on the line. I could tell right from the start that she was the kind of quiet type. I was always nervous when I got a girl on the phone. The conversation always started off rough, as there was a kind of air of tension to the call. I was a young lad and I wasn't all that confident speaking to girls, I guess. So I started speaking with the quiet girl, and as per usual, my friends began to gather around and listen in, and the conversation went something like this. Hello? Hey, sorry, I know it's late, but you're awake. How is it going? What are you up to? Huh? Who's this? Who, she says. It's me. If you don't tell me who you are, I'll just hang up. Hang on, just give me a minute here. Look, I'll come clean. I got the wrong number, but if you're free, why don't we talk for a while? That's pretty random, but okay, I'll talk for a bit, since I am bored. We ended up talking on the phone until late. It was really nice. I even left my friends to keep speaking to her in private. We spoke about all kinds of different things. I found out that she was in the same year as me at school, and she said that she didn't live all that far away from my town either. It was amazing. Because we were complete strangers, we were still kind of wary of what information would be appropriate to share, and even though we didn't mention street names or anything like that, I had a rough idea of where she lived. The conversation only ended when my battery ran low. I ended the call by asking for her name. It was Anna, and we said goodbye. We promised each other we would stay in touch. To me, at the time, it looked like my romantic dream was becoming a reality. I went back to my friends and told them all about the conversation I had. They then proceeded to tease me, but it was all good though. On the walk home, I kept thinking of Anna. I was daydreaming of what could be. I mean, to me, it was kind of a bit of harmless, semi-romantic fun. I just hoped that I didn't take it too far or something, you know? But I was still already kind of looking forward to the next time I would speak to her, whatever that might be. I didn't have to wait long to hear from her, though. The day after first contact with Anna, she called me. Hey, I just want to check in. How's it going? What are you up to now? Oh, hey, it's lunch break at school. You called back quick. Is anything up? Has something got to be up for a girlfriend to call her boyfriend? I was astounded by that leap she had just made. I mean, we didn't agree to date over the phone. It seemed a little out of the blue. Oh, damn, I guess I messed up. I didn't really know what to say. You maybe mistaken me for somebody else? Mistake? Mistake? What mistake? We spoke so much on the phone. How could you think that we're not together? Well, the thing is, I don't know you, and I don't really know what you look like. We haven't met yet, so I guess it's not right to say we're dating. It's like that. Well, I can fix that. Why don't we meet up today, then? Actually, I can't today. I have to stay late at school. I have football practice. Can I just ask something? Are you the same girl I spoke to yesterday? There's something off, you know? The vibe feels a little different here, and your voice sounds a little different too. Are you really Anna? It was true. It sounded as if I was speaking to someone totally different. I was confused. There was silence for a couple more moments, and then Anna replied. Really? Who are you to say what is real and what isn't? Do you know who I am? Do you even want to know? I don't even know who I truly am. Do you want to know what I'm capable of? Do you have any idea? It would be a terrible idea. Not to take me seriously, okay? As you know, I can be nice, but I can also be brutal. She went off like that for ages. It barely made sense. I just froze up. She was working herself up and getting madder and madder and more incoherent. I just couldn't stand it. I hung up on her. I turned off the phone. And I didn't turn it on again until the following night. I was freaked out by that girl. She didn't sound like she did the night before. I headed down to the park to play with my friends later that night. I wanted to tell them about what happened. In the end, we concluded that since I didn't share any personal information, and Anna doesn't really know where I live, then I would probably be fine. So with that realization, I decided to turn on my phone again. As soon as it finished booting up, I had an incoming call. It was coming from Anna. I was freaking out. Her threats from yesterday were still fresh in my mind. I asked if my friends would answer the phone, but they all refused. She just kept calling and calling. I needed to use my phone sooner or later, so I made the decision to take her call. I thought that I could apologize and we could put this matter to bed. Oh, you finally answered the phone. Where the hell have you been? Look, I'm sorry for hanging up on you yesterday. It was bad. Pretty much everything I've done, including calling you, has been a bad idea. I have to admit that. I am sorry. The other thing is I can't be your boyfriend. I won't call you again, and I don't want you to call me again, too. Once again, sorry about all of this. Even if those are your intentions, it's not an option. You don't get to leave me. Come on, let's get back on track. Let's meet. Let's keep talking. If we meet, I know you'll fall in love with me. Look, just tell me where you are. Tell me where you are now. I'll come to you. Tell me where you are. I was certain this wasn't the girl I was speaking to from before. I didn't know what to do. I had put the call on speakerphone for the benefit of my friends, and one of my friends took the initiative, and he hit the end call button. He then said, "Don't take any more calls from her. She's dangerous." She didn't stop calling, though. She would call the second school finished right up until about 10 p.m. each night for about a week. I think she was even calling when I switched off the phone at night, so it could have been even more calls. After that week, I couldn't take it anymore. I got a service on my phone which blocked specific numbers from calling. Then after that, the calls from public phone booths began. For some reason, I was unable to block public phone numbers, so I just had to deal with it. I thought that she would give up, but she didn't. There were over 200 calls from payphones. One night, I was playing with my friends again, and something dawned on me. I hadn't checked the number on the payphone in the park. I checked it, and one of the calls came from that payphone. She had been that close. I didn't play in that park for a while after that. I ended up changing my number, but most importantly, learning a lesson about prank calls. This happened when I was mountain climbing in the northern Alps of Japan. I'd been climbing and hiking all day and I'd gotten myself lost. Now, being lost on a mountain range is a special kind of fear, you know. When it begins to get dark, you feel something squirmy crawling around your stomach, but you know you just have to keep walking. Tiredness doesn't really matter as much. When fear is driving you, you cannot succumb to helplessness. When it got dark, I tried to follow the natural ridges of the mountain. I figured that they would lead me back to civilization. It's easier said than done, though, in the dark. I was looking in every direction for any form of light source, so I could aim myself towards it. I walked on with the idea in mind that when morning comes, I'll be thinking, "Oh, whoa, that was intense being lost on the mountain, but I'm okay now." Thinking back on it, I must not have been in my right state of mind, because if I really wanted to get off that mountain range so desperately, I had an option to set up a bivouac. It was early autumn, and there was a chill in the night air. Before long, it would be freezing, and then there were the fierce winds. It whispered and whistled through the trees. The temperature was about 0. I decided to change tact. I gave up my mountain ridges pathway idea, and I decided to head down through the mountainous woods and undergrowth. I figured that it would be a little bit warmer that way. I was sliding, tripping, falling. It wasn't a smart idea. I just had to keep walking, though. Walking in the dark. I was terrified that I was going to come in contact with some kind of animal that could bite. I mean, the insects were just as bad. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, I heard a voice calling from deep within the woods. It was calling my name. I felt a sudden rush of joy. I felt like someone had been searching for me. I felt more happy than scared. By right, I hadn't been missing long enough for anyone to be out here searching for me, though. Nevertheless, I followed the voice. I descended the mountain at a fast pace, searching for the owner of that voice. It was distant, but I could hear the direction it was coming from. The route I was taking was steep and hard, but I kept going. Eventually, I was running. More like that kind of run when you're coming down something steep, that unstoppable forward motion. I felt as if I was going to faceplant at any moment, as if my foot would catch some outcropping rock, and I would go flying. But thankfully that didn't happen. Actually, kind of the opposite happened. My feet touched down on asphalt. I had somehow arrived on a mountain road. The road was better than tracing the mountain ridges. A road was better than the shelter of the forest. Hell, a road was even better than a call of an unknown voice. I remember feeling incredibly giddy, thinking to myself, I'm saved. I didn't have enough energy or natural light to keep going that night, so I decided to bivouac down for the night. I made my makeshift campsite by the side of the road. In the morning, I would check my location with my map and set about getting the hell out of there. That night, as I was trying to get some rest, I kept thinking of the voice I had heard. The words I heard were as follows, and I'll keep my name anonymous though. Right there. No, not yet, but close, come on. Come on. Run. Go, go, go. Don't you give up now, you're so close. Come on, do your best. Something like that. I was told to run, but I couldn't really because I was descending a mountain in the dark. So the voice that called to me didn't make a great deal of sense, but it saved me from a life and death situation. I'm sure of that. See, the thing is, when I heard the voice, I didn't even get creeped out by it. I mean, I should have, I guess, but I just wasn't scared of it. It all seemed fine. By the side of the road that night, I did wonder if I should have been a little more concerned, but that voice, feminine it was, it did nothing but warm my heart and raise my spirits. While I was mulling this over, I guess I fell asleep. I was exhausted. Well, that happened a few years ago. In the resulting years, a lot has changed, to be honest. I don't go on such ill-planned mountain climbs and hikes. One very sad piece of news came a few years before that fateful hiking trip there. My mum passed away. She was in her 50s. I thought I would have a lot more years with her. After my mother's funeral, my dad handed me a box of videotapes. My mum had taped a lot of memories, and I was really glad. I watched one video one night when I really wanted to hear my mother's voice again. I popped in a tape, and one of my old basketball games appeared on the screen. It was way back when I was in junior high school. I remember that old jersey with a smile, the style of clothing, the audience, etc. It was all pretty nostalgic. My mother was there, screaming and cheering, the loudest of all the parents. It was so great to hear her again. But then something clicked, like an internal click. The words of encouragement my mother had been shouting at me in that basketball game were the same words I had heard out on the mountain range alone. Right there. No, not yet, but close, come on. Come on. Run. Go, go, go. Don't you give up now, you're so close. Come on, do your best. That support she gave me, it was eternal. I remembered what I was like at that age on the video. I went through a rebellious phase. I used to hate it, and get embarrassed when my mum would cheer me on like that. I was so rude to her after those games. No matter how rude or mean I was to her after each game, she was still my number one supporter, my biggest fan. Even after leaving home, my mum would contact me often. She would ask me how I'm doing. She would just want to know everything I was up to. Did I ask her about herself enough? I don't know. When it sunk in that the voice I heard in the mountains sounded like my mum on that tape, the love I had for her overwhelmed me, and I just couldn't stop crying. Since birth, she's always been taking care of me. So nowadays, when I feel really down or work just gets overwhelming, I play that videotape and it gives me the strength to continue. It's like she's still being my number one fan. This happened when I was in my second year of university. Back in those days, I was living far away from my hometown and living alone. I didn't have a girlfriend back then, and to be perfectly honest, I didn't have all that many friends. This meant that I had an abundance of free time. I'll show my age by telling you this, but back when I was in university, I got my main source of entertainment from the local video rental store. So I spent most of my time and money watching video rentals. I would watch anything, movies, TV shows, anime. To me it really didn't matter. I just enjoyed the company of my VCR and TV while I was lounging around at home. So one usual boring day, I headed out to the video store for some entertainment. Just outside of the entrance to the video store, they had these baskets of VHS tapes which were always low priced. I guessed that they did that to entice people into their store. I always stopped and took a look at what was on offer, and most of the time I would see the same tapes there, but that day, I guessed that they were having a clear-out sale or something because most of the tapes looked pretty old. All the videos were really cheap as well. In most cases, they were below 100 yen a piece. I thought I might as well have a little rummage through the tapes to see if there was anything worthwhile picking up. I found something that I was interested in. Home Alone. You know the one, right? The booby traps and all that. Back then, that film was still relatively new in Japan. I think my cousin had seen it and recommended it to me. I hadn't seen it yet, so I decided to give it a try. I mean, at that price, I figured I had nothing to lose. I headed home, and as soon as I got back to my dorm, I opened up the tape. Huh? Something didn't seem right. Usually when you open up a tape, you would see something like a sticker in the center of the tape, displaying the name of the film and stuff like the age rating, the runtime, and the name of the director or something. There should have been an official label, but there wasn't one. Instead, there was a plain white sticker with some jagged writing in ballpoint pen scrawled against it. I'll always remember this. It read, October 21, 1993. What the hell is this? I thought. I wondered if someone had swapped out the tape for a different tape, or if it was a prank or something. But then I thought to myself, well, it is a second-hand tape. I guess that the previous owner might have made a note on the tape for whatever reason. I just tried to keep an open mind. I popped my new tape in the VCR and hit play. The video started with a sandstorm of static and white noise. I watched for a couple of seconds while thinking, did I just buy a dud tape? I got annoyed. I was certain I got duped and I bought a rubbish tape. I leaned forward to hit the eject button, and just before I pressed it, the picture on screen changed. Was that the sea? It looked like it. There was a cliff overlooking the sea. The image quality was pretty poor, and what was even worse was the fact that the camera was shaking like mad. I'm guessing that I was watching a handheld camera recording. I kept watching. Then I heard another sound. There was a sound of a man mumbling. What the hell? All I could see on screen was the edge of the cliff. It was like the guy who was recording was pacing around. Then the camera started shaking like crazy. Was the guy running now? Hey, hang on a minute, I heard myself say. The camera flew to the ground, tumbled around and then landed, and then I saw the silhouette of a person race to the edge of the cliff. There was a horrible screaming, shouting sound, and then the tape then went back to static. I sat there completely lost. I was silent. I wasn't sure of what I had just witnessed. I ejected the tape and slowly put it back in the Home Alone case. I suddenly felt the urge to get out of my apartment. I wanted to get away from my TV. I decided to go back to the store. I asked the clerk there what was on that tape and why he was selling it to me, but he was as shocked as I was. I wonder if someone had swapped out the tape while it was outside in the bargain bin. I didn't really understand the contents of what I had seen until my friend told me about it. He said that he thought that it was a recording of someone's final moments. How the hell that got into a Home Alone VHS tape box is something I'll never know. I know that the man who ran towards the cliff didn't distribute that tape, and it makes me wonder if someone was with him, if someone forced or coerced him. It's a terrifying thing to see, and I'll always remember how desperate his voice sounded. It was horrible. There's a guy in my neighborhood they say looks just like me, and it's getting weirder and weirder by each passing day. Colleagues, friends, even my wife and kids have said there is someone in our area who is my literal double. My wife even said, "I've been living with you for 20 years and even I thought that it was you." That's pretty creepy, to be honest. Even my boss, who lives the other side of town, has apparently seen this guy roaming around. It seems like everyone in my personal little world has come in contact with this guy, even though he seems so prevalent in my world. I've never met him. I wondered who the hell this doppelganger was and how he could look so much like me that he was able to deceive my wife and children. Also, as a side point, according to one of my kids, this guy has a wife and his own children too. Now, I didn't believe my kid at first, but then at work one of my close friends said that there were rumors floating around that I was having an affair. This was all likely down to the multiple sightings of this doppelganger and his family. It was becoming awkward and embarrassing at this point, not to mention stressful. Last weekend, my parents came to visit, and as soon as I greeted my father at the doorstep, he said to me, "Hey, how'd you get here so fast? We just saw you go into the convenience store up the street there." I couldn't believe it. How the hell was my parents unable to see the difference between me and this guy who looked like me? What was worse was the fact that my dad asked to have a talk with me. He then proceeded to grill me and ask me tons of questions, trying to find out if I was having an affair, despite being shocked to see me in two places at once. He didn't really believe me at first, and I felt comfortable and confident enough to bring it up in front of my family. My wife backed me up and told my parents that she mistook the doppelganger for me as well. It seems like I have to go through hurdles to make people believe that I am the real me these days. This has been going on now for about a year, and I don't know when it will end. I'm considering moving away. Even though the doppelganger and I have never met, I can honestly say that his presence has affected my life negatively. I just don't know what to do. Hi, it's Jay here. There were additional comments added by other users which I felt were worth sharing here. Some say when two doppelgangers meet, they die. This happened to me once. I was on a business trip in Sapporo, but a colleague of mine was certain that they saw me in Tokyo. At the time I thought, wow, you must really enjoy creating your own little fiction. But when I hear stuff like this, I can't help but wonder. I mean, appearance is one thing, but I was told the guy who looked like me even had my voice and mannerisms. It happened to me too. When I was younger, my sister thought she saw me at a train station. She says that the version of me was browsing a shop there. She was certain that it was me, but something put her off from going over. I had seen her that morning, and she helped me pick out my outfit, and said that the person at the station was wearing different socks. To be honest with you, I was annoyed. I mean, if there is a doppelganger out there of me, I would love to hear that my sister went and spoke to it. She asked me if I was at that station later that night, and it's one I've never been to. Weird. Maybe I should go there. This was a horrible thing to experience. It happened when I was running late. I finished work later than I wanted to that night, so I was rushing home through the neon-lit downtown area of my city. I saw something as I was rushing that made me stop in my tracks. There was a little girl in one of the alleys. She must have only been about 8 or 9 years old. This part of the city at this time of night was no place for a girl her age, I thought to myself as I looked her way. I noticed that she was stood in an alley next to a well-established gentleman's club. Stripping and much more went on in there. So I'm told. I have no first-hand experience. Anyway, she shouldn't have been there. I was a little worried for her. She was wearing a red school bag, and it looked to be filled to the brim. It looked quite the burden for the little girl to carry. I wondered if she had gotten herself lost. She began to head further into the alley, and I went after her. I didn't need to second-guess myself. I had to find out if she was all right. She was walking in the darkness of the alley, all alone, her head down. "Is everything all right? Is your mother nearby?" I asked, tentatively. She said nothing. She just shook her head to indicate no. "How about your dad? Is he around?" Her face looked as if it turned to stone in that moment. "He's so far away." What the hell? I thought to myself. The little girl did an about turn and started heading further off into the alley. I reached out to stop her, and I ended up grabbing her by her bag. I must have caught a clasp or a clip on her bag because before I knew it, the contents of her bag began to spill out and cascade onto the floor. In her bag amongst the textbooks was a large transparent bag of white powder. "No way," I heard myself mutter softly. I called the cops. I had to. Something wasn't right here, and I was really worried about the girl. And why she had what appeared to be drugs in her bag. I heard from the police afterwards, and it turns out the young girl was being forced to work as a drug courier by her stepdad. He was apparently part of the Yakuza. Her biological father was in prison, and her mother had deserted her and left her with the gangster years ago. Her stepfather was arrested, and the girl was taken into care. I know this because I frequently pushed for updates. It was all I could think about for the longest time. The officer mentioned that she would likely go to an orphanage. I hope she's doing well, and I hope she's happy. To think that 3 adults let her down so terribly puts a knot in my stomach. I really feel for the girl. No childhood should involve being a drugs mule. This world can be so cruel sometimes.
This happened to me back when I was 12 years old, but I'll never forget it. When I was that age, I used to love playing outside with my friends. On the day that this happened, I was with a couple of friends. The weather was great, and we were looking for a decent place to go out and play. We were kind of bored with all of the parks in our area, so we decided to push ourselves a little more than usual and find a new park or playground to hang out in. There were 3 of us, including myself. We all had bikes. We rode for about 2 hours with no real direction in mind. We managed to get ourselves lost, and we all decided to get off our bikes to try to get our bearings back. We were in search of a park, but after a while, we gave up because we couldn't find one. We did find a vacant lot, though. We decided that would have to do. We all sat down and started to play card games. There was a forest right behind the vacant lot. It was thick, with tall trees and bushes. I didn't feel like exploring, since we were already lost and a little tired from cycling. We sat there, immersed in playing our games, until our peaceful playtime was disrupted by a noise coming from the direction of the forest. I asked my friends if they were hearing what I was hearing. They agreed, and we began to listen carefully. It sounded like the noise was gradually approaching. It sounded like a bell was ringing. Now, normally the sound of a bell ringing isn't that unusual or strange, but when someone is coming towards you through a thick forest, you've got to either assume it's something bad, like a warning, or that someone's mad. My friends and I had no interest in either of those outcomes, so we started packing our things up. Just as we were getting our bikes off the ground, we heard a louder rustling sound coming from the edge of the forest. We instinctively looked towards the source of the noise, and we saw a humanoid figure stumbling out towards the vacant lot, wearing tattered and torn clothes. One glance told me that this person was filthy. Their hair was so long and dirty, I couldn't clearly see its face. Attached to the worn-out shabby clothes was numerous rusty bells. You'll no doubt have noticed that I haven't specified a gender so far. That's because a part of me believes that this humanoid thing was far from human. It was the weirdest thing. It was like it was trying to be human. Like it had misunderstood, based on experiences with humans, how to act as one. It moved at a pace between jogging and walking, with each step seemingly different from the last. The bells jangled with each movement. For the first time in my young life, I was confronted with something truly terrifying. Something so incomprehensible, it caused my whole body to freeze, like a computer does when it's overloaded. It was only when my friend screamed that my body jumped back to life, and we hurriedly got on our bikes. The human thing, with the bells attached to it, seemed to be coming directly towards us. Clearly, it wanted to make some kind of contact. It didn't say a word. All you could hear was its shambling movements, coupled with the bells. We all started pedaling like mad to get away from it. Even though we were getting further away from it, we could still hear the bells following behind us. I was too scared to look back. I didn't want to make eye contact with that thing. I am just so glad its hair was covering its eyes. I didn't want to see what kind of face it had. We had no idea where we were, so we just kept cycling until we couldn't hear the bells anymore. It was a really frightening experience, which was made worse by the feeling of being lost. Once we were certain we were far enough away from the humanoid thing, we spoke to each other about what just happened. We had all seen the same thing, and none of us had an explanation of what it was. Eventually, we were able to get home safely after reading road signs and speaking with people on the streets. This was before the time when cell phones were common. A week or two went by, and I was out again on my bike with a different friend. He asked me to go to a park with him that I hadn't been to before. I was a little nervous, but I went along. We were having a good time until I heard a familiar sound. It was the sound of rusty bells jangling, and they were getting closer. I shouted out to my friend to get onto his bike and get moving. I couldn't see that humanoid thing this time, but I suspected it was coming towards us like last time. I didn't want to hang around to find out. Naturally, the next day at school, I spoke about it with my friends from the first encounter. Over the course of the week, they said that they had heard the bells again too, also in a park. Nothing happened after that, but I half expected to hear about that thing on the news, or hear from other kids that they had seen it too. I never heard the bells again. The mystery remains. I wonder if someone put the bells around its neck so that they would know where it was at all times. I wonder if it escaped from somewhere. We do have a military base nearby. This is, however, pure speculation on my part. I hope I never encounter it again. Maybe it was recaptured. Does anyone have any idea what we experienced?